What if the angels you were taught to trust were the architects of your imprisonment? What if the so-called divine beings who descended to earth weren't messengers of light, but enforcers of a cosmic trap, so elaborate that humanity has been wandering in darkness for thousands of years, never questioning why suffering feels woven into the fabric of existence itself? There's a name that's been buried, a prophet who walked between worlds and witnessed things that made the keepers of orthodoxy tremble. His name was Enoch, and what he saw, what he recorded in texts deemed too dangerous for the masses, reveals a truth so unsettling that entire councils worked to erase it from sacred canon. He saw the Watchers, 200 celestial beings who descended to Mount Hermon with a mission that would forever alter the trajectory of human consciousness. But this wasn't about salvation or enlightenment. This was about contamination, control, the deliberate corruption of the divine spark within you. The story you're about to hear isn't just ancient history. It's happening now, in your bloodline, in your forgetting, in the cycles you can't seem to break. And if Enoch's visions are true, then everything you've believed about your soul's journey needs to be questioned. Are you ready to see what they've been hiding? In 1945, an Egyptian farmer digging near the town of Nag Hammadi unearthed a sealed jar containing 13 leather-bound codices. Inside were texts that had been buried for over 16 centuries, Gnostic gospels, cosmic revelations, and forbidden wisdom that early church fathers had desperately tried to destroy. Among the whispers of these recovered teachings, one name echoed with particular urgency: Enoch. But Enoch's story begins much earlier. In the mists of antediluvian time, before the great flood swept away the old world, there lived a man who walked with God and was taken up without tasting death. The canonical Bible gives him barely 5 verses. Yet, in the shadows of suppressed scripture, in the Book of Enoch, preserved by Ethiopian Christians, and fragments found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, a vastly different narrative emerges. Enoch was no ordinary prophet. He was a scribe of heaven, a witness to the forbidden, a man who journeyed through the 7 heavens and returned with knowledge that would make him dangerous to every religious authority that followed. What did he see that made his writings too volatile for inclusion in most biblical canons? What visions were so threatening that they had to be condemned as heretical fantasy? He saw the Watchers, the Grigori, 200 angels who descended to the earthly plane with desire burning in their celestial hearts. He saw their pact, sworn upon Mount Hermon, to take human women as wives, and to reveal secrets of heaven that humanity was never meant to possess. He saw the consequences, the Nephilim, giant hybrid beings born of forbidden union. He saw the corruption of human knowledge, the weaponization of celestial wisdom, and the beginning of what Gnostics would later call the archontic infiltration. But here's where Enoch's testimony intersects with the deeper Gnostic cosmology that rattles the foundations of conventional spirituality. To understand the Watcher's role, you first need to glimpse the cosmic architecture that the Gnostics mapped out in their secret teachings. In the beginning, not the beginning you were taught, but the true origin, there was the pleroma, the fullness of divine light, an infinite expanse of pure consciousness beyond all limitation. Within the pleroma dwelt the aeons, divine emanations of the ineffable source. Among them was Sophia, whose name means wisdom. In her passion to create without her divine consort, Sophia gave birth to a being of shadow and ignorance, the demiurge, also called Yaldabaoth. This false god, blind to the true light above him, declared himself the only God, and set about creating the material cosmos, not as an act of love, but as a prison. He fashioned the archons, parasitic entities, to serve as his cosmic enforcers, and together they constructed what Gnostics call the Hebdomad, the 7 spheres of limitation, the planetary powers that govern matter, fate, and the recycling of souls. The demiurge looked upon the material realm and saw it was empty of the one thing that could give it true power: consciousness. So he and his archons fashioned humanity, trapping fragments of divine light sparks of Sophia herself within flesh and bone. We became, in Gnostic terms, pneumatics, walking in amnesia, stars imprisoned in clay, divine beings who forgot their origin. Now, bring Enoch back into focus. What if the Watchers weren't acting alone? What if their descent, their transgression, their revelation of forbidden knowledge wasn't rebellion against the true God, but an orchestrated move in the Demiurge's grand strategy? What if they were archontic agents sent to further entangle humanity in materiality, to corrupt the divine spark through genetic manipulation and false wisdom? The ancient texts suddenly align. The Gnostic warnings about false angels of light. The Book of Enoch's detailed account of celestial beings teaching humanity, warfare, seduction, astrology as fate worship, and the cutting of roots and herbs. Technologies of control disguised as gifts. Even the New Testament whispers about principalities and powers and warns against the rulers of the darkness of this world. Enoch witnessed the mechanism of your enslavement being set into motion, and he wrote it down. Let's descend deeper into what Enoch actually recorded, because the details matter. The details reveal the method. The Book of Enoch names the leaders of the Watchers: Semjaza, Azazel, Amaros, Barakijal, Kokabeel, Tamiel, Ramiel, and others, 200 in total. They descended to Mount Hermon, and the text is specific about their oath. They swore together, binding themselves with mutual curses, knowing that what they were about to do was transgression of the highest order. This wasn't impulsive. This was a conspiracy. What did they teach humanity? Not enlightenment, not gnosis. They taught manipulation of matter and control of consciousness. Azazel taught men to forge weapons of war swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He taught women the art of deception through cosmetics and jewelry, the external adornment that obscures inner light. Think about that. The Watcher associated with the scapegoat, bearing away sins, is credited with teaching humanity how to kill each other and how to mask authentic beings with illusion. Amaros taught the countering of enchantments, magic used not for liberation but for binding. Barakijal taught astrology, but not as a tool for self-knowledge, as a system of fate, a way to convince humans that the stars, the very archontic powers governing the spheres, controlled their destiny. No free will, no escape, just predetermination under the watchful eye of planetary rulers. Kokabeel taught the constellations, encoding cosmic mapping that would later become the zodiac, that wheel of recycling that Gnostics warned about. Tamiel taught astronomy, Asaradel taught the motion of the moon, all celestial knowledge that sounds beautiful until you recognize it as teaching humanity to worship the very prison wardens, to chart their movements as gods, to surrender sovereignty to the celestial spheres. And here's where the Gnostic interpretation becomes chilling. The Demiurge and his archons need something from humanity, our worship, our attention, our energy. They are psychic parasites, feeding on the emotional frequencies we generate, especially fear, devotion, and sexual energy. The Watchers didn't just take human women, they taught humanity a new relationship with desire, one that would keep us trapped in flesh, addicted to sensation, perpetually incarnating to fulfill cravings that can never be truly satisfied in the material realm. The Nephilim, the offspring of these unions, weren't just physically giant. They were energetically monstrous, consuming everything: animals, humans, resources, each other. Enoch describes them as an abomination that filled the earth with violence and bloodshed. But what if the Nephilim represent something beyond literal hybrid beings? What if they symbolize the corruption of the divine spark itself, the creation of souls so entangled with matter that they could no longer remember their celestial origin? Think about the modern world for a moment. Does this pattern feel familiar? Humanity taught warfare and division, taught to adorn the external while neglecting the inner divine, taught to look to external authorities, celestial or terrestrial, for guidance rather than cultivating inner gnosis, taught that the material world and its pleasures are the ultimate reality, that birth and death are absolute boundaries, that we are small, weak, dependent on forces beyond our control. What if the Watcher's curriculum never ended? What if the systems of control they initiated have simply evolved, wearing new faces across millennia? The Gnostics understood this. In the Nag Hammadi texts, particularly the hypostasis of the archons and on the origin of the world, we find descriptions of archons attempting to rape Eve, to defile the divine feminine, to claim ownership over human reproduction and consciousness. We find warnings about the archons placing veils of forgetfulness over human eyes, creating a veil that makes us perceive the material world as the only world, the demiurge as the true God, and suffering as either punishment for sin or random misfortune rather than systemic oppression by interdimensional parasites. Enoch witnessed the beginning of this failing. He saw the moment when humanity's direct connection to the pleroma, that ineffable source beyond the demiurge's creation, was hijacked and rerouted through intermediary beings who posed as saviors but were actually jailers. And here's the question that should make your divine spark flicker with recognition. Why was Enoch's account removed from canon? Why were the Gnostic texts buried and deemed heretical? Why has orthodoxy insisted that you need external salvation, that you are born sinful, that you should fear divine judgment, that obedience to religious authority is the path to heaven? Because if you knew what Enoch knew, if you understood that the beings presenting themselves as gods are actually archontic imposters, that the reincarnation cycle isn't natural but engineered, that your divine spark needs no external savior because it is the divine already, you would become ungovernable. You would stop feeding the system. You would remember. And remembrance is the one thing the Watchers and their archontic masters cannot allow. Because the moment you remember that you are not from here, that your essence is uncontaminated light temporarily clothed in flesh, that the material world is a simulation designed to harvest your energy, the entire game begins to collapse. The Watchers didn't fall, they descended with purpose, to bind you here, to make you forget, to turn your divine spark into a battery for powers that masquerade as benevolent creators, but are actually cosmic predators. Enoch saw this, he wrote it down, and they've spent 2,000 years making sure you never read it with awakened eyes. But you're reading this now, you're questioning, and that questioning is the first crack in the prison wall. So let's ask it plainly. If the Watchers corrupted humanity at the beginning, creating a template of entanglement and amnesia that has echoed through every generation since, what does that mean for you right now? For your soul's journey, for what happens when you die? Is your next incarnation truly your choice? Or have you been walking into a recycling mechanism disguised as spiritual evolution? Here it is. The revelation that makes mystics from every tradition whisper warnings in cryptic language. The secret that Gnostics died rather than recant. The truth that Enoch glimpsed and tried desperately to encode for future generations who might have eyes to see. Death is not the end. Death is the audition. When your physical body ceases to function, your consciousness doesn't simply dissolve or ascend to eternal peace. According to Gnostic eschatology, and echoed in Tibetan Buddhist teachings, Egyptian funerary texts, and even early Christian mysticism, the soul enters the intermediate realm, the space between death and rebirth. But this space isn't neutral territory, it's an archontic hunting ground. The Gnostic text called the Pistis Sophia describes in detail how archons await souls at the threshold, acting as customs agents of consciousness, interrogating the departing spirit, demanding passwords and tokens, threatening those who don't know the secret names or sacred formulas. Those who can't answer correctly are turned back, redirected, manipulated into another incarnation before they can reach the pleroma. But the modern revelation, the one that's been surfacing in near-death experience research, past life regression therapy, and shamanic journey work, adds another layer of horror: the false light. Countless souls report encountering a brilliant, warm, loving light at death. They report deceased loved ones appearing to greet them. They report beings of apparent authority, councils of elders, angelic figures, even religious deities, who lovingly but firmly explain that the soul must return to earth, that lessons are incomplete, that karma must be balanced, that another incarnation is necessary for spiritual growth. And the soul, exhausted from life's suffering, comforted by familiar faces, dazzled by the light's beauty, agrees, signs the contract, return to the wheel. But what if that light isn't the pleroma? What if those beings aren't representatives of the true God beyond the demiurge, but archontic impostors wearing masks of love and authority? What if the entire reincarnation system, karma, lessons, soul contracts, spiritual evolution through suffering, is the Watcher's greatest trick, a cosmic con game designed to keep you perpetually harvested? The Gnostics called it the High Harmony, the sphere of fate, the zone of necessity, the 7 planetary powers through which the soul must pass to reach true freedom. Each sphere is governed by an archon who attempts to reclaim the portion of light the soul carries, extracting energy through fear, confusion, and false promises. Only the soul who possesses gnosis true knowledge of the names, the passwords, the recognition codes, can pass through unmolested. Now, connect this to the Watchers. Enoch describes how these beings bound themselves to the material realm through their actions and offspring. The Nephilim were destroyed in the flood, but their spirits, according to Enoch, became demons, wandering the earth as disembodied consciousness, seeking incarnation, attachment, any vessel through which to experience material sensation. Enoch records God's decree that these spirits would remain until the final judgment, unable to ascend, forever tied to the realm they corrupted. Do you see the pattern? The Watchers created a lineage of beings permanently bound to matter, and through their teachings, they bound humanity to matter as well, through warfare, through deceptive knowledge, through sexual entanglement, through worship of celestial powers, through the belief that the material world and its hierarchies are ultimate reality. They created a farm, and you are the crop. The reincarnation trap, the false light, the angelic deceivers, the karmic wheel, the soul contracts. All of it functions to keep divine sparks incarnating, suffering, emoting, worshipping, and ultimately feeding the archontic system with the energy of consciousness itself. You are a battery, a generator of emotional and spiritual energy, and the Watcher's legacy is the machinery that keeps you plugged in. Enoch's visions weren't just about the past. They were a warning about the future, your future, if you don't wake up before you die. Because here's the most disturbing implication: the Watchers taught humanity enough truth to make us spiritually curious, but not enough to set us free. They gave us astrology that maps our prison, but not the door. They gave us magic that manipulates matter, but not the gnosis that transcends it. They gave us technology of control disguised as enlightenment, and this pattern continues. Every spiritual system that emphasizes obedience to external authority, that teaches you to worship any being rather than recognize your own divine spark, that insists suffering is necessary for growth, that claims you need multiple lifetimes of lessons to earn your way to heaven. These are echoes of the Watcher's curriculum. These are archontic doctrines designed to keep you distracted, disempowered, and circling the drain. Even the concept of fallen angels, the mainstream interpretation of the Watchers as rebels against God who must be punished, serves the archontic agenda. It makes you fear rebellion. It makes you fear knowledge. It makes you associate the quest for forbidden truth with damnation rather than liberation. But the Gnostics flipped the script. In their reading, the serpent in Eden wasn't the villain, it was the hero, offering gnosis, awakening humanity to the reality that the garden's creator was a false god, that true divinity lay beyond the material paradise. Similarly, the Watchers weren't simply evil. They were agents of a cosmic drama whose ultimate purpose was to embed awakening codes within the corruption itself. Through their very transgression, they created the conditions for humanity to recognize the trap and choose transcendence. You, yes, you watching this, carry within you both the contamination and the cure. The Watcher's genetic legacy might run through your bloodline, creating tendencies toward addiction, violence, materialism, spiritual amnesia. But you also carry the divine spark, that indestructible fragment of Sophia herself, that light which no darkness can overcome once it remembers its source. The question isn't whether you've been trapped. You have. We all have. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge now that you can't unknow it? So, you've seen the cage. You understand the mechanism. The Watchers seeded the template of entanglement. The Archons maintain the system. The reincarnation wheel spins, powered by forgetfulness and false belief. And you're standing here, in a flesh suit, on a prison planet, wondering, what now? This is where the Gnostics diverge from fatalism. This is where Enoch's testimony becomes not just a warning, but a weapon. Because if the trap is built on amnesia, then remembrance is the key. If the system feeds on worship and fear, then sovereignty and fearless knowing starve it. If the false light tricks you at death through emotional manipulation, then cultivation of discernment now prepares you for that final test. Liberation doesn't wait for physical death. Liberation begins, in this moment, in this breath, with the simple revolutionary act of remembering you are not from here. The first practice is called the examination of consciousness. The Gnostics were meticulous observers of their own minds because they understood that thoughts are not always yours. Archontic suggestion, societal programming, genetic memory from the Watcher's contamination, these create intrusive thought patterns that feel like you, but serve the system. Several times a day, pause. Watch your thoughts as if you're a scientist observing data. Notice the fear-based ones. Notice the ones that diminish your power. Notice the ones that insist the material world is all there is. These aren't you. They're broadcast from the archontic frequency. Second, reclaim the divine name. In Gnostic ritual, the pneumatic, the one who carries the divine spark, learns the sacred names and passwords needed to traverse the archontic spheres at death. But this isn't about memorizing words. It's about embodying the authority of your true identity. Practice declaring, out loud or in meditation, I am not this body. I am not this mind. I am not this lifetime. I am a fragment of the infinite, temporarily clothed in flesh, sovereign and eternal. Repeat until it's not affirmation but simple recognition. Third, practice death. The Tibetan Buddhists do this through Phawa, the consciousness transfer technique. The Gnostics did it through visionary meditation, journeying in advance through the realms they would face at death. You can adapt this. In deep meditation, visualize your death. Feel your consciousness separating from your body. See the tunnel, the light. But before you approach, PAUS. Call to your divine spark, to the paroma beyond all creation. Demand to see beyond the false light. Practice refusing the beings who claim authority over you. Practice saying, I do not consent to return. I do not recognize your jurisdiction. I am calling to that which is beyond you. This is a rehearsal. The moment of death will be easier if you've practiced sovereignty 1,000 times before. Fourth, starve the Archons. They feed on intense emotional states, especially fear, rage, shame, and blind devotion. This doesn't mean becoming emotionally numb. It means not letting your energy leak into the frequencies they harvest. When you feel rage, observe it without becoming it. When you feel fear, breathe through it while remembering your eternal nature. When you feel impulses toward worship of external saviors, whether religious figures, political leaders, or even spiritual teachers, redirect that devotion inward toward your own divine spark. You are not here to worship. You are here to remember. Fifth, cultivate the inner light. The divine spark within you is literal, not metaphorical. Ancient mystics described it as a seed of light in the heart, a pilot flame that can grow to illuminate your entire being. Meditation on inner light. Whether through visualizing a flame in your chest, through breathwork that ignites energy centers, or simply through quiet awareness of the consciousness that witnesses all experience, strengthens this spark. The brighter your inner light, the less attractive the false light becomes. You'll recognize the counterfeit because you'll have spent years knowing the authentic. Sixth, build community carefully. The Gnostics met in small groups, sharing knowledge in secret because they understood that premature revelation invited persecution. You can't awaken people by force, and some souls aren't ready or willing to see the cage. Find others who resonate with these truths, share knowledge, but also be discerning. Not every spiritual community is liberating. Some are archontic harvesting operations disguised as enlightenment centers. If a teacher demands obedience, claims exclusive access to truth, or emphasizes your brokenness rather than your divinity, walk away. You're looking for co-conspirators in awakening, not new authorities to worship. Finally, live as if you're already free. This is the paradox. You're in the trap, but you can move through it like a lucid dreamer who knows the nightmare isn't real. Pay your bills, love your people, do your work, but hold it all lightly. This isn't your home. These aren't your final circumstances. You're an undercover agent of the pleroma, temporarily embedded in the demiurge's creation, gathering experience but never forgetting your origin. Every act of kindness, every moment of beauty, every flash of recognition between awakened souls. These are acts of rebellion against the archontic order. The Watchers tried to bind you here through contamination of knowledge, genetics, and consciousness itself, but they couldn't touch the divine spark. Nothing can. It's uncontaminatable, indestructible, eternal. And the moment you stop identifying with the flesh suit, the personality, the lifetime, the karma, the fate assigned by false authorities, and instead identify with that spark, you become dangerous to the system. You become ungovernable. You become what you always were, a god in amnesia, finally beginning to remember. So here you stand, at the edge of something that can't be unseen. The Watcher's descent, the archontic machinery, the false light at death, the reincarnation trap, the divine spark within you that no amount of contamination can extinguish. What felt like ancient mythology a few minutes ago now pulses with uncomfortable relevance to your life, your choices, your future beyond the body. This isn't information you can simply consume and forget. This is initiation. You're either going to integrate it, let it transform how you move through the world, or you're going to close this video and let the forgetting creep back in. That's not judgment. That's just how the mechanism works. Gnosis demands response. If you want to go deeper, I've created a free resource, Escaping the Illusion, a Gnostic guide to mastering reality. It contains practices, meditations, and deeper dives into the texts and techniques that the Gnostics used to prepare for the ultimate test. You'll find the link in the description. Download it, work with it, share it with others who are ready. But beyond the book, I want to hear from you. This growing network of awakened souls, people who are questioning the narratives, who feel that something is profoundly wrong with consensus reality, who sense their own divinity beneath layers of programming. This network is how we resist the archontic system. In the comments, share your thoughts. Have you had experiences with false lights in meditation? Do you feel the Watcher's legacy in your own lineage? What practices help you remember your eternal nature? And if this resonated, if something in your divine spark recognized the truth in these words, subscribe to this channel. Every week we're going deeper into the hidden knowledge, the texts they don't want you to read, the practices they don't want you to master, the truths that set you free from invisible chains. Because here's the final secret, the one that makes all of this not just theoretical but urgent. You don't have infinite time to wake up. The body ages. Death approaches. And if you reach that threshold still believing the Matrix is real, still worshipping external authorities, still convinced that obedience and faith will save you, you'll walk right back into another cycle. Another lifetime of forgetting, another round of suffering and harvesting. But if you do the work now, if you cultivate gnosis, practice discernment, strengthen your inner light, and remember your sovereign divine nature, then when you face the false light and the beings who claim ownership of your soul, you'll do what Enoch learned to do. You'll do what every liberated Gnostic has done throughout history. You'll look them in the eyes and say, I know who you are, I know who I am, and I do not consent. And you'll walk past them, through them, beyond them, back to the pleroma where you've always belonged. The watchers fell to bind you. You're here to fly. Remember,